Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Luke Johnson from Noetic.app, the intelligent social media product that is now available for you on your iPhone and Droid devices. We have done some updates to make our discussions features more robust and more generative. Plus, we have a ton of new content from public domain encyclopedias such as the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica and much more content that will be uploaded in the near future. I'm back with Dr. Jonathan Cook, and we're going to talk about a very surprising, do we want to call this a novella? Is this a novella?
Yeah, I guess you call it novella.
Yeah, we're going to call this a novella. We're going to be talking about Nathaniel West's The Day of the Locusts, right?
Right.
So, um, I, uh, I read this very quickly. I was sort of disoriented by it at first. I just finished watching the movie that came out in 1975. I was telling Dr. Cook how much I enjoyed it. Felt like a blend of Blue Velvet and David Lynch's Twin Peaks: The Return. It was kind of a mind scramble. So, all in all, I really enjoyed this, and I think we just jump into this. I've never heard of Nathaniel West. I think it's interesting. His last name is West, and we're going to be talking about
Yeah.
Hollywood land, which I learned today was the entire sign that they had up there. And I guess there was an earthquake there in 1933, and it demolished the Hollywood land sign, and then they restored it as Hollywood. I didn't know that. I think it was like a 6.5 earthquake that happened in 1933. Did you know that?
No, I don't know anything about that.
Yeah,
But
yeah, it was bizarre. So this we're getting a glimpse via Nathaniel West into what it was like to be in Hollywood in the 30s, and I have to say, not a lot has changed in a lot of ways. It seems,
yeah.
and it was great to get this sneak peek. I really enjoyed it. But can you tell us a little something about Nathaniel West?
Yeah, he was Nathan Weinstein. He's born of Russian immigrants. Grew up in the Bronx. His family was originally from the area of Latvia, which, at the time was part of the Soviet or the Russian Empire, rather. So family came to the U.S. and late 19th century. He's born in 1903, and his father worked. Had a construction business. And so Nathan, he was a good student, went to public schools. He was a smart guy, but he was not very studious. So he had to alter his grades to get into college. He got into Tufts. But then he read a lot as a student, but he screwed up at Tufts and failed a bunch of courses. But then he impersonated his cousin, Nathan Weinstein, and got into Brown based on his cousin's identity. So this is like massive fraud that he perpetrated as a young man. I mean, this, we're hearing a lot about this kind of thing today with, usually it's the parents who are corrupting the system to get their kids into college. This is the kid himself who gets into Brown. But he's a smart guy, so he graduates from Brown. He's Jewish, so he's not, really. He's going to have to fight a lot of prejudice. He was in a Jewish fraternity, actually, but he graduates from Brown, and he read a lot. He was very well read in classics, but he tried to make a living doing various things in New York for a while. He was the manager of a hotel at one point. And he also had some other odd jobs. And he began writing, and he became familiar with sort of the New York literary scene. And he got to be good friends with S.J. Perlman, who's a wonderful humor writer who wrote for The New Yorker for many years. And Perlman married his sister, his younger sister. So S.J. Perlman used to write a lot of very zany, humorous sketches that were just, filled with all kinds of improbable events. I mean, they were, I don't know if you call them short stories. They are more sort of humor pieces about crazy things that are semi imaginary, things happening in New York, but just kind of Marx Brothers humor. And so they, S.C. Perlman and West, hung out together, wrote together. West, he tried theater. He worked in the movies. He wrote fiction. His first big break was Miss Lonely Hearts in the early 30s, which is about an advice columnist in New York. And it also is a sort of black comedy or satire about the business of being an advice columnist.
Any
So
connection to the Beatles?
what to the Beatle?
To the Beatles, the
Uh,
Lonely Hearts,
oh no
Sergeant
no yeah
Pepper.
yeah I don't know about that, but anyway, he he gravitated to Hollywood three times in the 30s, early, middle, and late 30s. The main experience that he used for Day of the Locust, which was published in 1939, he was using his experience writing for the Republic Screen Company in the mid 30s for a couple of years, and so he churned out a lot of movie screenplays. Of course they usually they pay you and then they don't use your material, or they use little snippets of it or whatever. So he was a paid screenwriter. He got to know F. Scott Fitzgerald out there. He got to know other people. He's very well connected with friends. He and Fitzgerald actually died within a day of each other. Fitzgerald, of course, drank himself to death, and West, who got married in the late 30s, died in a terrible car accident in L.A. when he was outside L.A. coming back from a trip he had taken to Mexico. Apparently, he loved to go hunting. He was kind of an outdoorsman. And driving back with his wife, he ran a stoplight and smashed up, and both he and his wife were killed. So 1940. So he left four novels, a bunch of screenplays, and some smattering of dramatic writings. So he's kind of considered sort of a minor writer in American literature, but an important writer of the 30s and an important Hollywood novelist, because he, Day of the Locust, along with The Last Tycoon of Fitzgerald and Bud Schulberg's What Makes Sammy Run. These are like the three big books about the movie industry. So he's sort of a cultural historian in a way, even though he's satirizing American culture and in a way just pointing out how destructive the movie business is. It's kind of exploiting people's dreams and causing this kind of aching vacuum for all the fans, like the movie fans who riot at the end of the book. They're all displaced Midwesterners who have gone to L.A. for some kind of excitement or entertainment, and they're not
Well,
satisfied.
they eventually get it, right?
Well,
It's
they
just a
get the
little
entertainment. Yeah,
yeah,
the violence.
it's just a little too immersive, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the thing. Their boredom leads to violence, and it's also I was reading that there's a hint of sort of awareness of what's happening in Europe, sort of the threat of crowds and fascism. In that last scene of the riot when they're all at the Hollywood premiere, the kind of the new threat that crowds are creating in the 30s, the mid 30s in Germany and elsewhere.
Yeah, they're in that scene. I would have had to pause the movie to see it, but they had some headline, like some newspapers that would just went too quickly by camera for you to see. If you
Yeah.
pause it and slow it down, I'm sure it says something about FDR and Hitler
Yeah.
or something like that. Um, what was interesting to me when I was doing a little bit of research on the book earlier today was, okay, I've never heard of this book before. You suggested it, and but it is like everywhere in our culture. Like Bob Dylan wrote
Yeah.
a song that references it. Amy, which is called I think it's called Day of the Locust. Amy Mann wrote a song that references it called Patient Zero on an album that she put out in like 2017 called Mental Illness. Um, but the biggest one, and we were
Yeah.
talking a little bit about this, is that that Matt Groening in a handful of interviews, the creator of The Simpsons, disclosed that he actually named the character Homer Simpson after Homer Simpson from this book, which
Yeah.
is something we should talk about at length because that's just kind of crazy. We were talking earlier. I was saying I've been a Simpsons fan my entire life, and everyone just kind of knew that it was for Matt Groening's father. And then more recently, I've been thinking about the Odyssean aspect of The Simpsons and how it's connected to um, Homer. But
Yeah.
Donald Sutherland in the Schlesinger movie, like he has a lot of Homer Simpson traits. He's like a simple,
Yeah. Simple is
lovable,
Simpson. Simple.
yeah.
The name
Like
is revealing. Yeah.
I just didn't realize this book had this far reach. You know
Well, I think
that people.
it's particularly the apocalyptic angle to it. The locusts of the title come from Exodus and the Book of Revelation. The locusts are a plague sent by God. So they're an Egyptian plague, and one of the plagues, along with frogs and blood.
Don't we
Um,
in Revelation? Don't the
and
locusts come out of the bottomless pit or something? Or
yeah, they're Revelation chapter 9. They come after the first trumpet blast of the angel. Their seals, their trumpets, and then their vials of wrath. So it's pretty much midway in the punitive scenario of God's punishing wrath. But the locusts are in the book of Revelation. They create a completely sterile landscape because they eat everything up, and they have this weird mythological armor on them. Um, and it's totally crazy, very surrealistic in Revelation. I mean, everyone is still trying to figure out what the hell Revelation is all about. But the symbolism is obviously taken from the Old Testament. This plague creature, and in the book, of course, it's like the locusts are the Midwesterners who go out to California and sort of eat everything up in terms of culture, and are sort of left making the land sterile and bleak. So the apocalyptic symbolism is there, and that I think had some appeal for a lot of people, even if they hadn't.
yeah,
Yeah.
trying to Doctor. I wanted to try to figure out how close the movie and the book adhere to one another, but um, how do I not spoil it for people? But we're given this impression that Todd's character has sort of an unconscious premonition of the ending, and he confronts these soulless beings um, in the end. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, in the riot, I mean,
Yeah.
he's trampled. His legs are broken, and he's carried off by the police, right? And then the last sentence of the novel means that implies that he's kind of lost his mind because he's imitating the siren of the police car, which is taking him to safety out of the crowd, or the sound of police cars arriving at the scene of the riot. Um, but we don't really know what happens to him.
Okay.
It's a little ambiguous. And one other ambiguity I think I'll ask you is Homer Simpson when he had Faye Greener living with him.
Mm-hmm.
She was just he was buying her clothes for her movie career and doing all these things, basically supporting
Right.
her. But he wasn't sleeping with her. I mean,
Right. It was a business arrangement.
It was a business arrangement. Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure what he got out of it.
Yeah.
That was confusing to
I
me.
think he was kind of a benevolent soul, you know.
Well,
I mean,
right?
we assume, except at the end, he kind of lost it.
He snaps, right? He's
yeah.
absorbed so much emotional abuse from everyone.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the shock of having the young woman whom he was supporting, and the fact that she, he caught her, having sex with someone when he was, being Mr. Nice Guy. So all his inhibitions were kind of trampled on. All his repression was abused by her, and so he sort of lost his mind.
I'll tell you what, I will never listen to that song Jeepers Creepers, How'd You Get Those Peepers, ever the same again. That is, it took a my grandmother used to sing that to me when I was a little boy. It was a very innocent thing, and now after reading this and watching the movie, I'm like, wow, that's some dark stuff going on there.
Well, apparently there are 8 songs in the book, and each of them has a important role to play.
I saw there's some classical music in it, maybe some Brahms. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, what I love is that scene in the funeral parlor when he goes to for the service for Harry Greener, and they talk about the fact that the consolations of Jesus wasn't coming obviously for this occasion to save this soul. But the Brahms, that comes in. I think it's at that point. But the other thing that is just the funny thing about this book is the wonderful take on Hollywood movies and the golden age of Hollywood with all these massive sets and getting created and then trashed, and the scene of the Battle of Waterloo, was hilarious description of what it's like to walk on a Hollywood movie set. Have you ever taken a tour of, Paramount or MGM?
I think I did when I was a kid when we went to Disney. I don't know. Oh, you know what? Maybe I did a long time ago. I went out like Universal Studios.
Yeah, Universal. I took the Universal tour, and I have to tell you, I felt like a total rube because it was so cheesy. And it was so, you were just kind of cattle herded into the pen, taking this little trolley ride through the lot and having all these sort of phony movie scenes enacted around you. But, something you do.
I find it so interesting that we have Napoleon reference in this, and especially since the movie came out in the mid-'70s. Because there was a big Napoleon movie that came out in the 70s. It may have been even called Waterloo. And the reason I even know this is because one of Kubrick's like great unfinished masterpieces is Napoleon.
Oh yeah.
And he ended up not doing it because he felt like it had already been done. And he ended up making Clockwork Orange and Barry Lyndon in The Shining instead. So there was like a big, it's just interesting how like in the mid 70s, there's like this like big Napoleonic fervor and like trying to recapture those battle scenes, which you're talking about leading to the destruction on the set and what that,
it's like. It's hilarious though the way they describe it. Like, he writes these sentences where one half of the sentence is about the historical event, and then the second half switches to the technical aspects of the movie making. So it's like the French killed General Picton with a ball through the head,
Right.
and he walked away to his dressing room,
Right.
in the second half
Right.
of this. So all this stuff, it's just hilarious because it's all true about Hollywood, and especially when that set collapses on the hill, Saint Jean, Mont Saint Jean, which is a famous location of one episode in Waterloo, and this thing collapsed.
Which was fatal for Napoleon,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, but the actors were all, no one was killed, but they all got a lot of workman's comp for injuries that they
One guy was
received.
like, "I'm gonna get $500 for my
Yeah.
broken leg."
Yeah, so they were all happy that the set collapsed.
Yeah.
So that is what is the hilarious satirical element that I love about the novel.
But it's also horrifying.
Yeah,
It is horrifying because you don't. I mean, it's quite a collapse.
Yeah.
And like
Right.
people should have died in that.
Yeah,
And that's
right.
the thing.
you can
this is-
easily imagine it. Yeah, because these are
This is this book is has a lot of horror in it.
well. The other great set piece is the cockfight, which
Yeah.
I'm sure no one has ever heard or seen. Which is
Oh,
pretty gruesome, and
right.
and
It's gruesome and it's sexual too.
yeah, right. So it's kind of a foreshadowing of what's going to go on with Faye Greener and the fight between Miguel. Well, no, it's the dwarf Abe Kusich who rams the cowboy guy Earl Shoop. He rams him between the legs and jerks his head up. So he basically ruptures his testicles, out of jealousy because he won't let Faye dance with the dwarf, So
Yeah. Everyone
it's,
is so obsessed with Faye.
Faye, yeah.
Like,
It's so weird because she's technically 17 in this book. I mean, maybe she turns 18, but I'm just thinking of, some of the students I taught, if they would be possible, role model for this kind of, weirdly corrupt teenager.
Well, to be honest, I think what struck me about the Faye character was how, like, it must have been in the 30s, it must have been kind of an anomalous figure that seemed bigger than life. Maybe it just seemed like kind of like a movie star that people didn't have any sort of connection to. But now that everybody can kind of be a movie star with Instagram and everything like that, you can create a whole culture of people who are as narcissistic
Yeah,
as Faye.
yeah.
And
Well,
so now it's like,
The weird thing though
Yeah.
is, she has a little stint of prostitution for, Mrs. Jennings, and then stops it because she realizes actually Todd tells her that she might catch venereal disease. So
right.
I think of her kind of, if the symbolism of the Book of Revelation informs the novel, and I think there's a little bit more of it in the theme of horses, because in the beginning of the book there are horses and Napoleon's in the Napoleonic scenes, cavalry, and they're also the fake rubber horse at the bottom of the pool of the screenwriter. So I think we're dealing with the four horses of the apocalypse. But there's not a strong symbolism there, but I think it's just a hint.
I got it too, and And there's been people who have talked about Napoleon being an antichrist figure as well.
Yeah, right.
But that was we were talking about this off camera. Is that the scene in the movie where they shoot the horse at the bottom of the pool, the white horse, right?
Yeah.
That's actually shot at the Ennis House in L.A., and it's this very famous like Frank Lloyd Wright house that you may recognize from Blade Runner and other such like alchemical movies. And there's a white unicorn in Blade Runner, so there's something being alluded to with this white horse.
Yeah.
In the Ennis House, it's interesting.
Well,
I haven't had time to decode it, but
Yeah.
it's there.
But I was going to say about the Book of Revelation, the two major female characters are the Whore of Babylon and the woman clothed with the sun, this innocent virgin character who gives birth to a child. And so there's a kind of a switch of symbolism between this virginal young woman and the whore of Babylon. So maybe Faye is sort of informed by this sort of feminine dualism of she's got the sexual appeal that makes all these guys go crazy for her, but at the same time she can be very girlish with her father when she's playing around with him, when they're imitating the song routines that they do together. And she has a sort of sisterly relationship with Homer Simpson. So maybe that plays into it. I mean, it's not that explicit, but she is a peculiar young woman, precocious.
She yeah I yeah I she, not quite sure. She's just kind of I guess trapped by this Hollywood dream of hers, and it
Yeah, and
takes
she
over
has
her
that terrible,
personality.
that bizarre need to make story. But she has these great story ideas that Todd is going to help her with. But all her stories are so incredibly cliched and stupid that she's almost like a young girl, who's telling little fairy book stories coming out of a child's literature.
Yeah, yeah. We haven't talked a lot about Todd Hackett. I mean, do you think there's the thing I was wondering as I was thinking about it um, is there any, the names seem to be coded.
Yeah, well, Todd,
Uh,
Tod, 1D, that's the German word for death. So yeah,
oh,
so
interesting,
tote,
interesting.
Um, so Todd Hackett, well, he's a hack writer. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah,
that's
he's
what
a
that's
hack. He's a hack artist. He's not. He's doing illustrations and visual aids for Hollywood movies. He's not writing. And his ambition is
right.
to paint the burning of L.A. That's his apocalyptic artwork. So yeah, he is definitely a version of Nathaniel West
Yeah,
as an observer, as a cynical observer, outsider. Um,
yeah, and he kind of gets his position. At least in the movie, he gets his. I'm trying to remember if it's as clear in the book, but in the movie, he gets his position because of his Yale connections.
yeah,
But I mean, mm, I don't know. I think he's talented, at least the way they portray him.
yeah. I mean,
Uh,
he's a likable guy, but he's not really that strong a character. I mean, he's just an artist who's trying to make sense of the world he's in. And
trying.
like West, who was writing his books on the side when he was employed doing screenplay writing or whatever, Todd is doing his painting on the side, apart from his full time job at the studio.
It was interesting to me. Like I've seen this guy who played him in the movie. I guess he's William Atherton.
Atherton, yeah.
He he looked like a young Donald Sutherland to me. And I'll have to say, like Donald Sutherland playing Homer Simpson was like very odd, like
Yeah. Well,
so dopey.
one of the interesting things about Homer Simpson in the book is that he is, he's an innocent giant who is sort of the total opposite, polar opposite of the dwarf numbers runner and horse race tout artist Abe Kusich. But he's also apparently the characterization borrows a few elements from the 1931 version of Frankenstein. The first Frankenstein movie by a guy named James Whale,
Hmm.
where Frankenstein, he's got a very kind of lumbering look to him, but he has these big hands that he
Yeah.
looks at and he doesn't know what to do with. And also, just as Frankenstein is killed by the villagers in the movie version, at least not in the book, killed by the villagers for killing a young girl, throwing her into the water. And, her father comes with the girl in his arms, and the peasants of the town all rampage to attack Frankenstein. Well, at the end of West's book, of course, the crowds are attacking Homer Simpson for his homicide that, maybe I won't describe to spare the
Well,
feelings.
it's interesting, at least in the at least at least how it comes. And there seems to be like a lot of androgyny, and I don't know if it comes out as much in the book, but it does in the
In the
movie. And
movie,
like,
yeah.
yeah, I think there's.
Well, the little boy, Adore Loomis,
Mm,
is, I mean, he's his mother's trying to make him into a child star, based on the Shirley Temple story,
yeah,
right? So he is a
well,
kind of he's a little mischievous little boy, but he's also a cute little boy. So
yeah,
he's a little bit
it's
androgynous.
it's unsettling. And then there's the they go to a drag show
Yeah,
in the movie,
right,
and Homer doesn't know what to do because the singer is like throwing himself at him,
right.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and this and yeah, there's just when I think about the 30s, I don't think about stuff like this,
Well,
but
the great age of Hollywood, of course, they're creating dreams for people who can forget about the depression, right? The movie palace is a way that we got through the depression. In fact, the double feature was invented so that people would have a chance to spend 4 hours in a movie theater because they didn't have a job. Um, but we think of these big budget movies as ways to keep people entertained. And because of the depression, but in the novel or the novella, you don't really, the depression is not really present except for Earl Shoup, who's living in a canyon, living on trapping game birds. But we don't hear about Skid Row or people on the dole. The Midwesterners who riot at the end of the book are not angry because they don't have a job. They're angry because they're bored, and
well, I think part of it, their anger is because they did have jobs, right? Wasn't this in the book? Is that
yeah, they
they,
retired or they worked in the
yeah,
Midwest,
they worked their whole lives, and they go out to California, and they think they're going to spend their golden years out there, and everything's going to be amazing,
and it isn't.
and they get sick of it, and they're
Yeah,
like, wait, I worked for 40 years, and like all I can do is like eat oranges and go to movies. Like,
well, and
let's stir
look
things up
for
with a little right.
look for movie stars going into restaurants
Right.
or walking into premieres of their films.
So I think they feel like they like messed their lives up because they were working for a prize that wasn't really a prize at all.
Yeah.
It
So
was
there's
fake like the sets,
so yeah,
right?
there's a kind of nihilistic aspect to Hollywood and the Midwesterners. So yeah,
We talked around, we've talked around this subject, but uh, I mean, maybe we could define it a little bit better in terms of the surrealistic, grotesque. Like we've talked about instances of it. Um,
well, yeah, it's a satire, and this is more or less a satirical novel, except satires usually have some kind of moral message to them, or they have some kind of character who embodies some kind of positive but neglected value. But this book really doesn't have any moral norm to it because even Todd is sort of losing his mind at the end, and he doesn't even represent anything, positive alternative. He's just trying to understand and depict the world there. So it's satire, and satire often has grotesquerie in it, purposefully ugly things to show just how bad life is. And surrealistic because this movie sets embody sort of dream sequences because you're going between all these different movie scenarios. You're going from a French village to an English country estate to a Mexican hacienda, within a few 100 feet of each other. And also, the architecture of L.A. also includes everyone's, dream house with a different architecture, which is still true. If you drive around Beverly Hills, you're you're going to do a lot of touring of architectural history. My brother used to live there, so I know that well, although it's been a while since I was there. Um, the
It's interesting.
surrealism, yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the dream the alternation between the dream sequences because in the movie you kind of catch people in between the changes,
yeah,
and they you know almost everybody looks like they're disassociated,
yeah,
like they're like MK Ultra, like just kind of zoning out.
yeah. And the
Uh,
plot doesn't have a traditional sequence because a lot of characters we don't know where they came from. We don't know what happens to them. Abe the dwarf, he shows up because Todd meets him in the hallway where he's lying there. His girlfriend has thrown him out, and he's surrounded by piles of clothes. And he disappears at the end of the book. Earl Shoup disappears. Miguel, the Mexican, disappears. Um, they come into the story and they go out of it without a lot of explanation. I mean, they're basically there to they kind of provide satellite distraction for Faye, who's the sexy young woman that they're all dying to sleep with. Um, so structurally, surrealistic, surrealistic from the movie sets, grotesquerie. Not many novels have dwarves as characters in them, or
that was the thing that struck me as like being potentially very Lynchian, right? Like, because one
well,
of this like one of these highly demonic figures in the Black Lodge is this
it's
dwarf that talks backwards and wears a red suit and
yeah, well, it's
um
kind of politically incorrect today. I think a Hollywood director would get in trouble if they
well,
didn't create a very positive looking cat role for a
Lynch
dwarf.
still does it.
He
Lynch
does
still
really.
does it. Yeah, he still does it. But I think people um but Lynch also has all sorts of I guess in the past what we would call circus people or something
Yeah,
like that. But I think the way that Lynch does it is they're celebrated. He's giving roles to people that have like who are very profound. They're not there. They're not actually there as subjects of ridicule. In fact, they're almost like demigods. Like
yeah,
they're coming from another realm, kind of controlling things.
yeah,
So, uh, yeah, that's the other thing that struck me. I remember the midget from, or I shouldn't say that, the little person
yeah.
from the movie Day of the Locust. Um, I think I recall it. I think he was in Weird Al Yankovic's UHF. I think he was in that movie. It was one of my childhood ones. So anyhow, but yeah, um, I yeah. I mean, we've talked about Homer Simpson a great deal.
Yeah.
I mean, we want to say more about Homer Simpson.
Well, it's funny because he, the story about how one of the reasons he left Iowa, he's a hotel bookkeeper, and he was freaked out because a woman wasn't paying her bill, and he had to go up and demand the bill, and he threw his wallet at her, and she apparently she's a prostitute or down on her luck, so she, thinks that he's making an offer that he's going to give her money and she'll give him sex, and he of course is so inhibited and uptight, so he runs out of there in horror, and then eventually goes to LA because he had pneumonia. So that story is from Nathaniel West's life when he was a manager of a hotel in New York. But anyway, he's kind of a squeaky clean Midwesterner who is very generous. He lets Faye live with him. He lets Earl and Miguel live in his garage, and
He's a total
so he's a
doormat.
chump. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's a simpleton, like his name
yeah.
implies. So he's a balance, to the other kind of know-it-all characters and smarmy people on the make. Um,
I thought it was kind of interesting. He's dry, like
yeah,
from a sobriety standpoint, and that's used against him. And I found that to be kind of an interesting dynamic. I've never really seen that represented before. At least how it's represented in the movie.
Well,
Like
yeah.
I don't drink, and so like
Uh-huh.
uh, I've always sort of wondered if that was problematic, but we 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 kind of see this illustrated writ large, like that it really weighs down on the people around him because they're all thinking like he's like communicating his superiority because he's not
Yeah.
engaging in this indulgence.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, he doesn't really fit in there in that world.
right. Yeah.
Um, so
Well, I'm talking all about the movie. You're talking
yeah,
all about the novel. I mean, I mean, uh, you haven't seen the movie, have you?
I have not. I read about it. I plan to see it. One of the things that concerned me was that they said the movie makes it much more bleak without any humor to it, and that's
It's a
okay.
dark. There's some
It's a
dark
dark
humor
movie,
there.
yeah.
It's
What did you think of Karen Black's? I mean, she was a wonderful actress from the '60s and
this is my, I think it's my
'70s.
first. I think this is my first introduction to her. I mean, I didn't. She's the woman that played Faye,
Faye,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I think she's a little older in her
yeah. She
character
did.
than
Yeah. So in my mind, Faye wasn't 17. Like Faye
yeah,
was
more like
somewhere
mid
between.
20s.
Yeah, like depending on how much time has elapsed, because I'm not exactly sure how much time elapses. Um, but yeah, mid 20s, early 30s
Yeah,
is kind of. Uh, I mean, sh- I mean, she did a fantastic performance. I mean, I had a visceral reaction to the character. You know, I find her unlikable,
yeah,
and but I think that's the whole point. So I probably had the strongest reaction to her character
yeah.
because she's
Well, she's we don't hear much about her mother. Well,
right.
assuming
She's
her mother left her husband or died, maybe left the husband. And we don't hear anything about school. Did she graduate from high school? Uh, is she educated? I mean, she
she
seems. I guess
she's
she has just graduated from high school, but we
she's
don't.
intelligent enough to manipulate every man around
Yeah,
her into getting what she wants.
right.
So I wouldn't call her a dumb blonde or an idiot or something like that.
No.
Just what struck me about it was the out of control narcissism
Yeah,
and
she wants to be in the
the
pictures, just like her father. He's in vaudeville. He's one of
right.
these guys who tried to make the bridge the gap between the old entertainment, vaudeville, which was immensely popular in the early 20th century, late 19th. And then, a few people like Charlie Chaplin made it through from vaudeville into movies. But,
He was like a clown or something,
yeah,
right?
he played the sort of this clown character. But
He's very
Harry Greener, doesn't make it. He auditions. He tries to get in with people, but he doesn't make it into the new movie business
yeah.
of the '30s.
Well, he does a certain type of show business, trying to sell miracle.
Yeah.
What was he? What was he selling door to door? Was it a tonic or was it
No, it's
a
silver
cleaner?
polish.
Yeah, that's what it was, a polish.
Yeah.
And he was whipping out all these like terrible magic tricks to try to sell it. It was sad, funny, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Yeah, sort of the
There's
tie between salesmanship and entertainment and Hollywood.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I highly recommend the movie.
Yeah.
The reason why I'm talking about it so much is I finished it about a half hour before we started.
No,
I,
it seems to have gotten a lot of positive reviews. Just a few criticisms of the carryover from the book. I mean, John Schlesinger is a great director, and he's done some really wonderful movies.
no,
Um,
I mean, the only other one I'd ever really heard of is Midnight Cowboy.
yeah, he
And
did.
I've
He
never
did
seen that.
Far from the Madding Crowd with
Oh,
Julie
really?
Christie. Yeah, in '67, I think it was.
Interesting.
But he spent about 4 years, I think, working on Day of the Locust. He apparently it was a lot of money, and he spent a lot of time, making it work.
The details are excellent. I would highly recommend it. I mean, the attention to detail is fantastic. I mean, like I said before, like, I mean, I think it's like up there with like a Kubrick or a Lynch movie. I really
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
You know, like,
As a grotesque, dark comedy about
yeah,
American culture and the Dream Machine
right,
and Hollywood, which is, I mean, what about 40 years ago, a guy named Neil Postman, who was a media professor at NYU, wrote a book called Entertaining Ourselves to Death, which was
right.
about how the entertainment industry is sort of dulling our moral sensibilities and destroying our ability to distinguish between truth and reality, and that certainly is true today as ever. Uh,
Well, I
so
would say this movie is effective at that. I mean, you lose a sense of moral boundaries in this movie,
yeah,
especially towards the end. I mean, you kind of develop sympathy for the Homer Simpson character, and then that's turned like inside out. Uh,
right.
right at the end, like you're saying,
There's no
there's no hero here.
yeah,
You know, there's no one that you want to aspire to, and it all descends into chaos. Um, yeah, there's not anybody who's redeemable.
right.
Uh, but and like I said earlier, I mean, this novel or this novella, like, and this movie are still widely felt today. We just don't know it. Like, I'm just sitting here and being like, I have been indirectly tapped into these themes and these characters my entire life, and until today, really, I didn't have that eureka moment. It's pervasive.
Yeah.
So, like, it at least, I mean, I read a lot of books. I'm like a pre-educated guy. I've never heard of Nathaniel West, and yet, like, we got Bob Dylan singing about this book. You
Well,
got the Simpsons.
it's on the 100 best books of the 20th century. I think it was number 78 or something like that. So people have
Well,
ranked it there, but
it
yeah,
got past my radar.
the general reader does not get to it unless somebody recommends it to them.
How did you
Um,
find it? Just a best of
well,
list, or did someone say, "Hey, check it out"?
well, I noticed it. It was published by New Directions Publishers, who did a sort of avant-garde literature in the 60s and 70s. They were doing sort of beat literature. But he also made it into the Library of America. So he has a volume of Library of America where you see all his novels and some of his short stories. So that's a pretty good benchmark that he's a classic now. And he's taught, American post World War II American literature. I'm sorry, Depression era literature. He would be an important figure, with Miss Lonely Hearts and this book. But of course, anyone who reads books on the Depression reads Grapes of Wrath and I don't know what else, but
Yeah, this was not. I wasn't even thinking about the Depression
yeah,
with this because so caught up in the Hollywood aspect of
yeah.
it all. That's wild.
So anyway, I just realized I
Well,
was in the dark. We've covered a lot, right?
yeah, we have covered a lot. Is there anything that you want to add? I mean, I don't. We've gone for probably 45, 50 minutes, which is a little shorter than we usually do, but I love this book and I love this movie, and I
Yeah. Well, it's
I'm kind of ashamed I didn't know about it until this week.
yeah.
I didn't.
Well,
I
West. There's always that marginal tradition of. I'm thinking about Naked Lunch. William Burroughs. I mean, how many people read that? They read The Beat, they read Jack Kerouac, but they don't usually read Naked Lunch until someone's really clued them in on it. So this is always kind of a marginalized tradition that is the satirical, the black comedy, But once in a while it gets to the mainstream. Like Kurt Vonnegut's books are sort of in this genre. They're surrealistic satires about American culture in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But of course, I don't know who reads Kurt Vonnegut these days. He's
I think a lot of I don't know. I'm not in touch with what the kids are
yeah, but
reading, but
yeah,
at least I know when I was in high school, some of the brainy kids were reading
yeah,
Slaughterhouse Five, which I have not read yet.
yeah,
Man, I have such a stack of books to read.
yeah.
Um,
Um, and Don DeLillo would be another, not a satirist, but a sort of black, a grotesque version of American history.
now, now that Don DeLillo, I have read. I read Underworld over the
Underworld.
summer.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
haven't.
and that was badass.
Yeah, he's
I
he's
really
been
like.
pretty prolific, but he is in that tradition as well. So it's there, and in fact, you could say Black No More, what we did before,
Right.
is in that tradition. Not many people are reading that book. I mean, it's hilarious. It's genuinely funny, but also pretty appalling at the same time.
Yeah.
So
There was
it's
there was more like outright laughter with
yeah,
Black No More,
yeah,
but the sad parts were,
yeah.
you know, you knew when it was a funny part, and you knew it was a sad part, and you knew when there was an impending sad part. I'd say with Day of the Locust, it's just
Yeah. Well, the
an oppressive darkness and
well,
surrealistic presence throughout the entire thing.
the one perfect instance of the fact that this is still with us, this whole idea about American culture being filled with these dark currents, is the Capitol riot of January 6th, 2020. I mean 2021. All of these people who were bought into a lie told by a soon-to-be former president, rioting with American flags against legislators in our capital, ramming through barriers and smashing policemen with their American flags and their Confederate flags, attacking our lawmakers, because they bought into some kind of surrealistic fantasy, is just the perfect proof that our culture is a breeding ground for lunacy and violence if it's allowed to fester. And there are people who benefit from it festering. Well, Hollywood feeds the dream machine, of course.
It's
Um,
very hard to tell the difference between reality and the movies these days.
yeah,
So, it might just all be a big movie, you
it,
know?
it is yeah, it's like the Truman Show.
Yeah, it just might be. Yeah. Well, look, I had a great time talking about this.
Okay.
Um, and I just want to thank you so much for being the
Yeah.
the
Well, I taught.
elder to initiate me into this genre or these particular authors.
Yeah.
And hopefully, you never know what kind of impact you'll have. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah. Well, it's 180 pages, so it doesn't take more than a day or two to get through
No, no,
as a story. So
good. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Cook. I
okay.
appreciate it so much. And we'll talk for a little bit and think about what we want to do next. And I'll hopefully have this edited up tonight. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Download the Noetic app and try out our new discussion features. Take care.